Hello, all you hardcores. How you doing? I'm joined by Julian. How you doing, Julian?
I'm all right, Russell. How's yourself?
I'm all right, fantastic. Training out like a Trojan. Picked up a few injuries though.
It's as we said, pal. It's old age, isn't it? We
Oh
get to
my
a
God.
certain age, we can't do it.
The mate Bunny says, look, you've got to persevere for 3 weeks, what you're doing, but I'm enjoying it. It's been a bit
It's
sore.
your, it's your body. Your body kicks back. Like I've said, I train all the time, as you know. And then if I have a couple of weeks off for holidays or for whatever, then I start eating crap and doing whatever. You're always ill, and your body kicks back, and it's saying, "Hang on a minute. 1 minute you're looking after me, and the next minute you're abusing me. You got to be consistent, haven't you? But get through the first few weeks, you'll be absolutely fine, mate.
Yeah. Straight in then, balls deep, Crusher Ben. Uh, the fighting Peter, whatever, that low rank guy.
Yep.
In Feb. I've just seen Crusher's interview. He says he's very proud of the fact that WBC have cleared him.
Okay.
Nobody asked, Coogan didn't ask him regarding strict liability or how could he explain how it got in his system. No one mentioned about that. 18 months down the line, cozy interviews with neighbours. Nobody mentioned it.
Well, as you know, I've just finished work. I've just drove over to Ossett. My son's doing his MMA class, and I'm sat in the car, everybody, and that's why there's no video. So you sent me the link, must have been 4:30, 4:45, and I said, I ain't got time to watch it, but I don't need to watch it because I can tell you everything what's in it.
He's
And
just as famous as the last one.
do you want me to take a wild guess what's the content is? And for anybody who thinks I'm lying, I think it's been uploaded pretty recently. I'm now in my car. It's 5:30 on a Friday night, so I clearly haven't been online. So how this will go is Crusher Ben saying the WBC have cleared me. Jose Sullivan has cleared me to the box. They've reinstalled me back into the rankings. That's the first thing that he's saying. He'll also be saying that he's done everything that the Boxing Board of Control and UCAD have asked him to do. He's complied with them. He'll be saying that. And the third thing that he'll be saying is that he's been allowed to box by the anti-doping panel who have cleared him and have overruled the Board of Control and overruled UCAD, etc., etc. And the fourth thing he'll be doing is he wants to fight Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, and Alexander Usyk on the same night, and he'll knock them all out in 30 seconds.
Well, he didn't say that, but he wants the big legacy fights. He said he wants the legacy fights.
Well, clearly I'm being utterly ridiculous and sarcastic, but he wants legacy fights. So what has he done? So what he started doing while he was early on in this scandal and the Eubank fight fell off last year, early doors 2023, he started making noises and he started calling out carcasses, didn't he? He started calling out Kell Brook, Amir Khan, Manny Pacquiao, Adrian Broner. They started linking the names with fighters who were so ancient and so shot, it was embarrassing. And then as time progressed, people realizing that, you know what, these guys are that old, they can't even get through a camp anymore, and they're not going to fight again, and it's just what I always call name association. Conor Ben then started to obviously go back down the Eubank Avenue, but he started to call out Ennis because he knows Boots Ennis. There's no chance of him fighting Ennis because his own promoter, Eddie Hearn, is building Ennis up to be the superstar, not Conor, but Eddie Hearn. So that's the first thing. And he's now starting to call out world-class fighters, isn't he? Fighters who are good because it's easy to do. It's easy to call out Terence Crawford because you're never going to fight him. It's easy to start a Twitter war with Tank because you're never going to fight Tank. It's easy to call all these fighters out because it's never going to happen. But what is interesting, I've tried to avoid this stuff as much as I can, but for some reason when Frank Smith's on, I like to watch Frank Smith because what I've found, you know, Russell, that I study body language, it's the psychology and body language is really interesting to me. So I like to watch Frank Smith when he's online because Frank Smith's a really bad liar and he has all those classic traits of someone who knows he's lying, and he knows that you know that he knows that you know he's lying. So I watched Frank Smith about a week ago or something. He was talking about Conor Ben. Maybe it was a few days ago, and they said, why who's he fighting now? Because Peter Andre, then he might as well be. Why Peter Dobson? Why Peter Dobson? And Frank Smith said something along the lines of, listen, it's a sensible fight right now because obviously we have to be realistic. You know, Conor's been out for 18 months. He's only had one fight back. So what Frank Smith was basically saying was, we have to fight out we have to fight the likes of Peter Dobson because that's where Conor Benn is right now. Because we fight anybody who's really got a pulse, the wheels are going to come crashing off really, really quickly. And it was just really interesting watch Frank Smith respond to some questions when it was why Peter Dobson. And he more or less said, Russell, because that's where we're at right now and it's a guaranteed win. If we go in with anyone a bit more dangerous, it's too much of a risk. And he actually used the word risk. Well, I thought Conor Benn, according to what Eddie Hearn was saying before his last fight in September, he said the way he's looking, he's going to hurt somebody, didn't he? He's going to hurt somebody. Conor Benn was saying
round one,
anyone is going to smash him all to pieces. The mentality he's got now, anybody from 147 to 160 is going to get hurt. We saw him go 10 rounds without the special protein shakes, as Terry calls them. We saw his last fight with 10 rounds. They're now desperate for a blowout, a highlight reel knockout, and they brought a guy in who's got a padded record, who's 33 years old, who's aging, who's been dropped by BoxRec because he hasn't boxed for 18 months, and he's an absolute patsy, and he's going to get blasted out in 2 rounds because they're desperate. Because there's a couple of things happening now. One of them, people are becoming bored of Conor Benn because the world's moved on, hasn't it? We've got all these big fights,
hasn't it?
The world's moved on, Russell. We've got the Crawford, who absolutely just destroyed Spence, just looked brilliant. He's cemented his place. We've got Boots Ennis now, who's hot as a contender coming through. We've got big fights happening. We've got all this activity over in Saudi, atmosphere or no atmosphere. We've got all this activity going on with big name heavyweights on these showcase cards. And in the UK, there's not a lot going on. There's no avenue for Conor Benn in the UK anyway, really, right now. And he's becoming the forgotten about man. So you know as well as I do, there'll be no love between him and Matchroom. It's coming to a stage. And if you're Conor Benn and you're saying, I can stop everybody in 1 round, and then Frank Smith's answering why Peter Dobson is saying, well, we have to be realistic. He hasn't boxed for 18 months. He's only had 1 fight, blah, blah, blah. Basically, actually, yeah, he's really not that good. We've tried to build it up as much as we can. And you all saw what happened in September when he was fighting effectively a journeyman with a padded record. And it was a poor performance. It was that poor.
There, couldn't it? I bet Eddie were cringing up my own.
It was that poor, his last fight. Because that guy, I don't care what someone's record is. You know that, Russell. Someone can fight or they can't. The guy was tough, but he'd got no skill set whatsoever. He'd got nothing about him. He started as a flyweight before people start saying he was big. You only have to check his weights in his previous fights for the past 2 to 3 years to see he's come up through the weights. And he's really a light welterweight, not a light middleweight, a light welterweight. And what he found, he had a decent chin, and Conor Benn couldn't do a thing with him. It was that bad that the full fight's been removed from the zone, and what we've got now is highlights, 7 or 8 minutes highlights of Conor Benn landing spectacular punches, because the whole thing as a 30-minute fight was pretty poor. So, like, I always go hard on
30 minutes. They only show 9.
Exactly. So I always go hard on Conor Benn because the wheels have come off. No one's conned by this anymore. You can say as much as you want, Conor, that you've been cleared, but the WBC don't issue licenses, all right? Because it was overturned on jurisdictional grounds and technicalities, as we know, and the UCAD and the Boxing Board of Control were basically technically caught out on a technicality, then, yep, he's picking up licenses in the US. And one of the funny things, because I have watched the odd little thing, one of the funniest things that I did watch was I saw a quote somewhere on, it might have been on Google, I don't know, where he said he's going to get to achieve his dream because he's really looking forward to headlining in Las Vegas. I mean, I'm thinking, wow, this is Ray Leonard headlining in Caesar's Palace. This is, you know, Canelo Alvarez headlining at the MGM Grand. No, this is Conor Benn headlining against Peter Andre. That's what I'm going to call him, against Peter Andre in at the back of some little slot machine alley, with about 30 people there, and you be able to hear a mouse fart. That's what he would call headlining in Vegas. Then, nah. I mean, it's like dreaming of, it's like dreaming of going on a date, isn't it, with Cheryl Cole or Cheryl Tweedy, whatever she's called now, and you actually end up with Michelle McManus. That's where you're at now, Connor.
Can you imagine when they get to Vegas and he's on strip and he's stood in front of where it says Ben Dobson? It's going to look cringy and say, "Yeah, bro, I've done Vegas, I've done the Vegas thing."
I've ticked the box. I've headlined this. I've headlined that. Do you know what? It's like, it's just forced, isn't it? And as we've said, I didn't read too much or too little into Peter Dobson. There were two things that I did when I heard he was fighting a guy called Peter Dobson. The first thing was I asked myself, have I ever heard of Peter Dobson? And I was like, you rack your brains, and I wasn't being rude, but I'm not as close to it as possible. Maybe Kent's heard of him. I don't know. Kent might be a good person to ask. And I'd never heard of Peter Dobson. So the second thing I did was I jumped on YouTube. I found some of his fights, and I watched 2 or 3 rounds, and I saw someone who was very, very poor, who, if he was British, wouldn't win an area belt. Now, that's not being harsh. That's just being realistic. Is really, really poor, but also because we know Conor Benn doesn't fight punchers, and we know why. He's not a puncher. He's really not a puncher.
Well, he tends to lead with that right hand a lot, doesn't he? And he's got that like crouching style like his dad, hasn't he?
Yeah, but Peter Dodson's very, very slow as well. There's not a lot of head movement. He's got quite a conventional style. Yeah, Conor, for me, there's a lot of things technically what aren't great. There were a couple of things I've seen in his last fight where I think I was honest and I gave him a bit of credit for 1 or 2 of the things he was doing. But generally, it wasn't a great performance. But what Conor Benn does, his stance is way too wide. Now, the reason people know this, I'm not teaching anyone to suck eggs, but the reason fighters have a really wide base is so they can generate more power. Because the narrower the base, a little bit less power you get when you're talking about, that kinetic chain rotation. So rotation, big rotation, comes off nice wide planted feet. But the problem with having wide planted feet is you can't just push off your front foot and go backwards when it's a case of springing back out. You have to take 2 steps to do that. It's a little bit harder to do. So his feet are too wide. But also what happens as well is like I say, he's unable to do the second phase because his feet are too wide. So he can have those wide feet against somebody who's not that great, who's not going to have great movement and great spatial awareness. But against the fighter who's half decent, that wide stance will just be horrendous. It's just be so bad. And when I see some of the bag work and the pad work that I have seen with this wide stance, I'm not the first person to point it out. There's a lot of people talking about this wide stance, almost doing the splits. And it's absolutely bizarre. He's almost trying to get more power into his shots by going even wider with his stance. But it's because I think he does lack natural power. So you've heard me say this before, Russell. So we talk about this massive puncher, Conor Benn. It not just has he had 3 KOs in his last 6. In his last 10 fights, he's had 5 KOs. He's had 5 stoppages in his last 10. Now, that's not a puncher's record. That's pretty average. So what that affected
sorry for butting in, but I agree with what you say. But a lot of guys have that sort of record when they're fighting in world titles, like world champions. Not when they're getting to that level. Because he hasn't won all, as he should be knocking everybody out, shouldn't he?
And that's exactly, nice one, Russell. That's exactly it. I was just going to say, so when you get to the top level, you don't just knock guys out. I absolutely understand that. So what that proves is, has he had 22 fights? So he's had 22 fights. So at that absolute opening novice level when he turned over is stopping more people than he's not. But he's not even at the mid-level yet, is he? Never mind the names of the Algeria. He's not at the mid-level and he's not knocking the guys out. It's just a load of crap. So Has he replaced the special shakes with the additional wide stance? Because that stance is getting even wider, you know, it's bizarre. It's like
Is that how they get more power?
you try to get more power of a wide stance, but it becomes counterproductive because you lack agility. You're unable to double step. You're unable to do that second phase quickly. You're unable to push off because the best way to describe it, I could show you, but if you stand really, really wide, okay, when you move in boxing, and I'm going into coaching mode, and I don't mean to be patronising, right? But the simple principle of movement in boxing. So when Terry's got one of his amateurs, Terry will teach footwork at 3 different levels: novice, intermediate, and advanced. The advanced guys, you break the rules. So there's like a certain rule with your footwork, right? Which you can't bring your feet together. The reason you don't bring your feet together is you've got no balance, you've got no power, and if you get hit, you're going over. But also, when you bring your feet together, either moving forward or backwards, your head doesn't really move. So the reason you push off the front foot or push off the back foot or step up or step in is so the head moves with it, the whole body moves with it. So when he's got that wide stance, if you think of your stance being really, really wide, you can't push off your front foot onto your back foot because you need to widen your stance to push off. So with his stance being so wide, what that means is to move backwards, he has to move his front foot first, break the rule and bring the feet together, but he's still in range, and then he has to push up the front foot a second time to bring his feet back out. I can show you this stuff, but basically what that means is it's 2 steps to be defensively clear, and instead of 1 step. So there's a disadvantage in that is too wide, that is, I think, is actually losing power. But there's also a disadvantage by the fact that he has to double step off the front foot to get out of range or to come underneath. Like I say, people might understand if I showed this, but Terry or Ken will kind of go, yeah. No, I know what Jules is talking about. The reason I'm saying it, Russell, is because it's really bad coaching. Because I don't care if you're Conor Benn, you think you're the next Godzilla, you're the next Roberto Duran. It doesn't matter to me. If your feet are bad, your job as a coach is to fix those feet. And that's the one thing I said to you about Ben Davison with Joshua, didn't I? I said a few weeks ago before the fight, it looks like he's working on certain basics, and you should never be afraid as a coach to go right back down to basics and strip that fighter down and have him brush him up on his feet, on his hands, on his elbow positioning, on his chin, on anything like that. You should never be afraid to do that. And I'm like, so if I was watching Conor Benn on that, I'm like, your feet are absolutely horrendous. And what I'm saying is, if his feet are right, and if that wide stance generates power, why have we got a 50% knockout ratio at pretty poor level so far, in these last 10 fights? The knockout ratio is not there. Okay, apart from the old guys he's knocking out. The very basic techniques aren't there. But Conor Benn looks to me like a kid who he wouldn't be told anyway, because his dad was the same. They won't be told. But Conor Benn, at least Nigel Benn, had natural power. So some fighters have natural power. So I'll give you an example. I know I'm a bit long-winded here, Russell, but so Prince Nazim, Nazim Hamed broke the rules because the general principle of throwing power shots, whether it's a right hand, a left hook, an uppercut, whatever, the general principle is an even distribution of body weight across the feet and the hips, but both feet have to be in contact with the ground. Not the heels on the floor, but the feet have to be in contact with the ground. Whereas Nazim Hamed had such natural power that Naz could throw a shot leaning on his front foot, or he could sit on his back foot and throw a left cross when he was switching in a southpaw position. He had natural power that he didn't need to put both feet on the floor and anchor the base. He didn't need to do that. And Nigel Benn sometimes did. Ben would sometimes, his balance would be all over the place, and he'd throw those Hail Mary left
Anthony Logan fight.
Exactly, throw those Hail Mary shots. He wouldn't even be looking at his opponent, but his natural power got him out of jail. Now, I don't think Conor Benn's got that natural power. So I think he's really enhancing that stance to try and get every single pounds of torque in that shot as he can. And he's still only getting half the guys out of there. So it makes me very, very suspicious as to other things that he was doing when he was getting at least 1 or 2 of those knockouts, which were a couple of those knockouts were pretty devastating. It makes me ask those questions. And And I think they're replacing one thing with another. I think they're replacing elements of the protein shakes with trying to really plant those feet even more to prove, you know what, I am a puncher. And you know what, the one thing I can tell you, Connor, is unlike your dad, who did knock out world-class fighters, the Doug DeWitts, the Iron Barclays, obviously the Jared McClellans, unlike your dad, you don't hit hard enough, mate, to knock out world-class fighters still relatively close to their prime. His power at the absolute world level won't be a factor, mate. And anybody who thinks it is talking nonsense.
Well, the only people who think it is power, it is real power, the Essex Army that are going over there that he's on about. We're looking at it. It looks like they're sticking Johnny Fisher on card because he'll take fans out of the Posh Army, and they'll make out that it's the Essex invasion when really, if Ben went on his own, like in Florida, not less than 10 people went, didn't they?
Exactly, and that's where we're at, isn't it? So we know what they're doing. They're padding the card out. They're making a big beano there. They'll make it noisy, as you've said before. You know, people who work in audio visuals and stadiums, and they know all about how to amplify the sound and how to get the cameras in certain parts of that stadium. They'll show the Bok Army. They'll all be chanting. There'll be 3 people in a bar chanting Nigel Benn. They'll boost the sound up. Conor Benn, sorry. They'll boost the sound up. And they're going to try and make a big party of this, and he'll blast out Peter Dobson, or he better do, and they'll be saying this is a devastating power. He's like, remember Eddie Hearn? He's like a caged animal. He was trying to make out it was like Mike Tyson hitting holes in the dressing room wall when Butch Lewis went in to check his raps, and poor Michael Spinks was terrified. He's trying to make out he's this caged lion. And we didn't see a caged lion, did we, in September? We saw... Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, I'm going in on Conor Benn because it's just a massive marketing ploy. Listen, if you're good enough, you just think... I know, I'm not going to mention him because he's your mate, right? But if you think of Carl Frocher, right, he just breezed through domestic level, didn't he?
Oh, I think he knocked them all out except 2, didn't he? Dale Westerman.
Exactly.
I forgot.
Lennox Lewis.
Matthew Barney took Froch distance and Dale Westerman. The rest of them, he blasted them away.
But if you're good enough, if you think of even Junior Witter, they gave him his belt early because Junior Witter was breezing through domestic level, like Alan Temple and all those guys. It was breezing through them. You know, anybody who's any good on a world level will breeze through domestic level, and that's how you attract the most attention. Why hasn't Conor Benn just breezed through and fought all the domestic operators out there?
Well, because he knows he'll get beat and they want to carry it on as look at who his dad were. And they're selling it off that. And this is what, listen, are you telling me Eubank can't get a fight? Of course he can. There's loads of fights on the table I've heard back. I've seen screenshots of people offers. There's loads of fights for them, but they know that it's got to be one where they're the favourite and everything's stacked in their favour, or they're not going to risk it because they're at that stage of their careers where Eubank, if he takes a good hiding like Beefy Smith getting first time, he might not be able to come back from it. And Ben, if he gets beat, the whole stack of cards will come tumbling down because he's not that much far above Campbell Hatton, is he really, in ability? Whereas Eubank...
No, not really. Yeah, not really.
Whereas Eubank's a bit more advanced than them both, isn't he, really, in what he's done?
Well, Eubank's at least rounded, isn't he? He can do a little bit of everything. And, he's, even if you look at Eubank when he's fought the Groveses and those guys, he's at least been able to hang, and Billy Joes, he's at least hang with those guys, hasn't he? He's been competitive with those guys. He might not have beat those 2 guys, but he's been competitive. And it's, Conor Benn, he just pretty much avoided everybody. He could have had Marku, who's not doing a lot. There's a couple of welterweights. It's too late now. Who he could have gone down that route. And I always ask the very, very same question: if you avoid domestic level, why? Why did you avoid domestic level? And I think realistically we know why, don't we? Because he would have got found out, and then the whole thing. And it's unbelievable, isn't it? Really, that if you think about it, he's 27 and a half. And he hasn't got one win over anybody who's world class. So before anybody corrects me there, when I say world class, I'm talking about someone who is world class today, not someone who was world class. He hasn't got one win against somebody who is world class today. He hasn't got a win over a good top domestic operator, or he hasn't got a win over a really good solid European type of opponent. So
after 22 fights, he's been nowhere near anybody, has he really?
And they've all been non-punchers. Chris Algieri, who was the one we all know the most, he'd been a colour commentator for DAZN or whoever for 2 years. He'd been sat on a sofa. He hadn't scored a knockout in 7 years, and they dragged him off the sofa.
Well, look
And
at this
it's
guy
like-
here. This guy here is fighting now. He's been inactive 20 months.
Yeah, he's been, and that's it. And Frank Smith was saying, well, Connor's been inactive. Well, Connor actually hasn't, and this is where it becomes really unfair. So Connor's had the best of training, the best of everything. He's been a full-time pro. He'll have had that top quality sparring. He has had a tune-up in September, that 10 round.
October.
October. But he fought the guy in September, didn't he? So he has boxed. But this guy, Peter Dobson, you don't even know if these guys are either getting quality sparring, Russell. I don't even know if he's a full-time pro, if he's got sponsorship, if he's been looked after, if he's getting the right supplements, because he'll have earned absolute peanuts, by the way. This is a guy who's got a record, a decent-looking record, and you know what it is. It's just nonsense, and people just believe this stuff. And I know I talk about Conor Benn quite a bit. Like I say, we thought we'd squeeze one in tonight while I'm waiting for my lad, but it's the obnoxious nature of the man, and that's why I've not seen this thing on IFL. I don't wish to see it. He's being cleared of nothing right now. He is free to box, or else he wouldn't be boxing, Peter Dobson, and he wouldn't have boxed, but he's not free to box in the UK. And as I said to you, just to simplify the Conor Benn situation right now, he's got nowhere to go. And I'll tell you why he's got nowhere to go. Because there are 3 avenues that Conor Benn can go down, and the one he's chosen is the avenue of least desirable. The avenue he wants to go down is to fight in the UK. You know that, and I know that.
Yeah.
The second avenue he'd settle for is Saudi. The Saudis are only interested in the big men, and where they are bringing in the light heavyweights or the super middleweights or the cruiserweights like Jao Pataya, they're bringing in the proven world champions. In Saudi, they want the proven world champions or the big men, the interesting characters. So there's nothing over there right now for Conor Benn at all. There's no demand for Conor Benn in Saudi. So it leaves that third avenue, the avenue that he doesn't really want to go down, but is no choice, which is the small hall casinos in the US, because people can say whatever they want, Russell. In the US, he's really not that well known. He's not. He's becoming a household name in the UK for obvious reasons, and even more so for the scandal. But in the US, the average man in the street wouldn't know who Conor Benn is. The hardcores might do, but they just think of him as a welterweight contender. No one thinks of him as the hottest, next best thing at welterweight. People really don't think
like he's some Olympic gold medalist.
That's what I'm saying. So he's nowhere, is he? So right now, can't box in the UK. Not really wanted in Saudi, so all I can do now is fight in the US. And I'll tell you something, I don't know what's written into his contract, but I bet his fight purse is pretty poor, because how are you going to generate money? The live gate's not going to generate money for that fight. It's an absolute piss poor bill. It's a dire bill. There's no local interest, as far as I'm aware, for a Vegas audience. So you know as well as I do, it's either going to be the Fisher Army, or that casino, like everywhere else in Vegas, is just going to be comps. They're going to be asking people from the streets in the casinos, do you want to go see some boxing? And the rest of the tickets what aren't bought by Fisher's Army or the other kid who's on the bill, they're just going to be giving them away, mate. It's going to be that cringe. They're just giving the tickets away, and that's where he's at right now.
Austin Williams, Ammo Williams, he fights a guy ranked 126, and yet he's ranked number 7. I mean, what if he's supposed to be a world contender? Why is he in with a guy at rank 126?
Yeah, and who's making these matches, mate? It's
Johnny Kevin Rooney Jr., Johnny Fisher versus TBA, but people are buying tickets. It's fighting TBA.
I mean, I can't think of a, you know, for a DAZN show or for a Sky show. And Sky, since Matchroom left, you've got to be honest, they've had some pretty shocking bills. But for your average punter, I don't think I've seen a worse bill than that for a long, long time.
Eddie will be embarrassed by that, won't he?
It'd be embarrassing, and they'll get a 1-round knockout, and then there'll be the clickbait and everything else. But what I will say, and I think you started off, so I'm going to have to shoot in a minute, Russell, with my lad will be back in a minute. But what I will say is this, buddy, and I've said this before, and I understand Coogan and Boxing King Media, I understand these guys who have access, but why is nobody just saying to him, all right, the WBC have cleared you then, so did they find that there was no clomiphene in your system? Are the WBC the ones who have licensed you? What do you mean cleared? What why is no one asking these questions? So
Because
IFL, shame on them. But access to what? Access to bleeding Conor Benn and Peter. It's shameful, isn't it? It's shameful how we've seen what's happened with Simon Jordan falling in line with he's almost become a mentor for AJ, hasn't he, Simon Jordan? So he's meeting Conor Benn, in some hotel wherever, and this lovely young man Conor Benn. I saw something that Simon Jordan online was saying about how AJ needs to feed off this negativity. It's great for him, and he's looking great at the moment. So Simon Jordan's now switched firmly over to Matchroom, and the two big fighters in Anthony Joshua and Conor Benn that they've got, Jordan's all over them now. He's becoming a mentor, isn't he? Instead of becoming a hardened critic who was going to stand on the side of right and the side of just and the side of good, is now becoming this mentor of fighters, this secret kind of conduit who meets these people in hotels and builds them up, and every time he talks about them says the lovely young men, and is now frozen out by Fury, and it's like, it's just cringe, mate. But do you know what? Coogan and all these guys in IFL, you might live in big houses, you might wear designer clothes, you might be happy with doing what you're doing, but I'll tell you something, you've got no backbone. I'm not saying you haven't got integrity, because the likes of Coogan, I hear, is a good guy, but you've got no backbone. None of you. None of you guys, Boxing King Media, Coogan Cassius, Boxing Social, none of you have got any backbone whatsoever, because it's not that you don't know what questions to ask, it's you haven't got the backbone to do it. So you're not doing what you're supposed to do, which is be impartial and objective and be fundamentally journalism. You just...
The PR groupies on these people now, aren't they? And they're just groupies, aren't they? It's absolute starstruckness.
Yeah, they're just groupies, and it's shocking. And you know what? I just think you have to be. We say it all the time. We'll finish on our favourite one, mate. It's a man in the mirror moment, and we all know what this. We all know what this is. Conor Benn will get swiftly dealt with when he steps up to any kind of world level. He'll fade away. They'll piggyback onto the latest hype, the latest thing, and this is how these guys make a living, mate. I think that's the way I'm going to describe them. I'm not going to start saying they don't have integrity and they're not decent people, because that's unfair of me. I'm just going to say they don't have any backbone.
Well, Coogan's got a mortgage, hasn't he, obviously, and needs to go to work, doesn't he? If he upsets them, it's out on his ear, isn't he?
And Coogan, the most important to Coogan would be his family. And I understand it, but I just think, you know what? There's an element, and there's a section of the public out there who actually would appreciate these. They'd get more respect and more sort of kudos for having some backbone and having some fibre than they are for just doing the same old soulless, vacuous, empty interviews, because they're just walking cliches. And that's why I won't watch this Conor Benn interview, Russell. Not because you've sent me the link or anything like that. I won't watch it because it's predictable, it's Groundhog Day, and it's spineless.
Yeah, it's dragged on long enough now, and this will be his second fight, and no, it's been cleared. They don't even look like there's an hearing this month, does it? It's all gone quiet, hasn't it?
Well, that's what we're effectively saying now, isn't it? Because this is the one thing that has happened is this is now new in sport, that we have people who haven't satisfied the anti-doping agencies. I'm not talking about the anti-doping appeal jurisdictional. They haven't satisfied the anti-doping panel and the licensing authorities what is in the system and how it got there. That's the basic thing we want to know, is how it got there. And do you know what? One more thing, it's my favourite thing is this, Russell. You know it is, buddy, right? But why? Just one question for Conor Benn. I want one person to ask Conor Benn this question. Have you taken the hair follicle test? Because we know that science now is so advanced that a hair follicle test can prove beyond any shadow of doubt, like it did for Canelo Alvarez, that there hasn't been long-term use of performance-enhancing drugs. A follicle of hair can prove that. Conor Benn, did you submit last July when you were saying when the first test came out and you knew the first test had come out, did you go to all the lengths to comply, and did you provide a hair follicle test? Someone needs to ask Conor Benn that, someone needs to ask the Simsers that, and someone needs to ask Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith that. Have you heard that one question, Russell?
Never heard
in
it
18 months? Not one person. Never mind the doctor, never mind the mysterious power, never mind not proving the chain of custody where the eggs come from, which is really, really easy. Never mind not clarifying whether it was in your system or not. None of that. Not one person has asked a question about the hair follicle. And science has proven that is an irrefutable way of just shutting everybody up, shutting the Russell Hartleys up, shutting the Julian McGowans up, and shutting everybody else up. Submit the hair follicle test. Not now. She might be clean now since then. Did you submit one at the time? Because Canelo did. Whatever we say about Canelo, he did, and that's why his ban and it was reduced significantly. He said, look, you can't prove strict liability, but we're going to reduce your ban significantly because you provided a hair follicle, and you've also signed up to the 365-day testing where they can test you 5 times a day. They can knock on your door at 3 o'clock in the morning. Canelo Alvarez, whatever I've said about him, he did those 2 things. And Conor Benn hasn't done one thing. So
I don't even know if Conor Benn's even gone to a lawyer, do we? It's all bluff and counter bluff, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't even know if he spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on a lawyer. He's too busy spending money on cars and property and holidays. We don't even know if he's got that kind of money. He can't have earned millions and millions for the fights he's had. He's not had enough fights at a high enough level to have the kind of wealth he's got. So he's either superficially rich and he's all fur coat and no knickers, or he's got a load of people just giving him cash left, right, and centre, because he won't have earned enough, mate. He won't have earned enough.
Yeah.
Knackers. It's all knackers.
All
That's
right.
your word. That's your word, that, Russell. Right, my lad will be coming out of his MMA class. I never thought I'd be uttering those words.
What,
My son coming out.
Knackers. It's a South Yorkshire.
Utter knackers. My son doing MMA, utter knackers. But thanks for the rant, mate. You've wound me up for the night now, so there you go, buddy.
Listen, you take care. Have a great evening, Julian.
I've no kids next week, so let's do a couple next week, mate, yeah?
All right, you take care, mate. Bye.
Take care, Russell. Bye, buddy. Bye.
Well, that was Julian. Very explosive there. Very, very, very explosive from Julian. Women love him. Men want to be him. Okie dokie. Thanks for liking and subscribing and sharing this on your socials, WhatsApps, your Twitters and all that. God, peace out. Everybody have a great weekend. Pop, pop, bang! Free party with Terry out tomorrow. You might have already seen that now. If I was to put this out now, we'll see. Anyway, there's some good videos for you. I hope you've watched them, and we've had a good week this week. A good strong week for Porky's Corner, and we're here to stay. Anybody who's got any knackers and interested in doing a Zoom, the books are closed. Now we're fully booked up now. Unless you've been on before and you've got my number, you're unlucky. 99% of yous have got no knackers who leave comments. Just chat utter shite. Go on. Jog on. Peace out.